Today we're at 4,500 meters. We've been camped up on this ridge because we've been snowed in. Yesterday we spent the entire day in our tent. These series of films on mountain science are just to give you an idea of some of the things that you may encounter if you're on an expedition and some of the science behind them. So we're going to be taking a look at things like altitude and the fact that the air pressure reduces at altitude. This means that there's less oxygen available to us, and this has implications for our body. We're also up higher, so the ultraviolet intensity is much greater, which means that we have to apply more sunscreen, wear big floppy hats, and use sunglasses, preferably with glacier protection. There's also a greater risk of dehydration because the humidity decreases as we get higher up. And of course, insulation is also an issue. We might suffer from hypothermia if we get too cold. So I'm wearing several jackets here, including a puffy one, and I'll definitely put on a big down jacket when the sun goes in. So there are various things to think about if we're on an expedition in the mountains. And some of these films are going to have a look at some of these issues. I'm in my garden. I'm about to go off on my mountain science expedition, and before I go I'm just going to do a quick reading of my oxygen saturation level, so find out how much oxygen is in my blood. So this is a pulse oximeter. Just going to put it on my finger and it will give me a reading. So at the moment it's saying 96, 97. So that's the percentage oxygenation of my blood. So it's almost fully oxygenated here at sea level, as we would expect. I flew to Kathmandu, the capital of Nepal, and met the rest of the group. From Kathmandu, we took a couple of flights on small planes into the mountains. We were nervous. This was arguably one of the most dangerous parts of the expedition. The sun was rising, and we watched out the window as the mountains got higher and higher. We landed on a bumpy, dusty runway in Julbo. And all our kit was quickly unloaded so the plane could turn around and go back. We had some lunch and got walking. We had a 10-day walk to base camp ahead of us. We had lots of kit, including my science equipment that I would use to make measurements and do experiments. It was a beautiful walk through incredible scenery. And we met lots of people on the way. The mountains always make me happy. This is the first night of camping. So today we've walked from Julbo all the way to Denai. Actually, it's not all that far. It's been quite a quick walk. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking some temperature measurements while we're here. I've got a data logger, and I've got different sensors that measure temperature, humidity, pressure, and ultraviolet. So I'll be taking those measurements hopefully almost every day. And I'm also going to be doing some measurements boiling water. So this is going to show us the effect of atmospheric pressure. So I'll time how long it takes for water to boil. So these are just some of the experiments that I'm going to be doing during the trip. So let's start. I'm going to do, first of all, I've got the barometer, which will measure atmospheric pressure. And this is the humidity sensor. And I also have a sensor for ultraviolet. So I'm going to plug all of these in. And using the data logger, I can record all the measurements. So the data logger is set so that it's measuring for 30 seconds. It's taking one reading a second. So these are all static measurements, but it'll give us an average over that 30-second time. So press go. Okay, so this is finished measuring now. I'm going to record. Now I'm going to do the temperature measurements. So this is a temperature sensor which I've attached to the data logger. And we just set it to take the temperature readings. Now I'm going to do an experiment that tests my mental and physical impairment at altitude, because as we go higher up, the effects of altitude sickness will actually make it much more difficult to do simple tasks, like, for example, making a small duck out of Lego. This is just 6 Lego bricks put together in the shape of a duck, and I'm going to be timing how long it takes me to make this duck at different altitudes. So today we're at about 2,000 meters. I'm just going to break the duck up into its 6 little bricks. And I've got a stopwatch here, so I'm going to measure the time it takes for me to do it. So I'm going to I'll start the stopwatch and time. Okay, go. Oh. I'm fumbling already and we're not even very high. Duck. And stop. Okay, so this is quite slow actually, I was fumbling. Just over 16 seconds it took me to make this duck. I did it earlier and it only took me 14. But anyway, so we're like the realm of 14 to 16 seconds to make a Lego duck. And as I said, we're about 2,000 meters here, so we'll see how that changes as we go up. Now I'm going to do an experiment, seeing how long it takes for water to boil and the temperature that it boils at. This is going to vary with the atmospheric pressure. So here I have a Jetboil, which is going to boil our water very quickly. Put in some water. And I have the temperature sensor here attached to my data logger. So let's put that in. Okay, so this is on full and the temperature is recording. Yeah, full on. So it's getting hot very, very quickly. It's steaming already. It's already at almost 80 degrees. There are a few bubbles here, 90 degrees. It's really bubbling here now. Yeah, it's really bubbling now. But it's not going to hit 100 degrees. The graph on the data logger is leveling off. Yep, it's completely leveling off. So this water is boiling, and yet it's not boiling at 100 degrees. It's actually boiling at 93.5 degrees. So we're at about 2,000 meters here, and it's boiling at 93.5 degrees. Already there's quite a significant difference in the temperature at which water boils. So we'll see how this changes as we move further up the mountain. Something else that's really important that I need to do is I need to measure my oxygen saturation. We're already seeing the effects of the reduced air pressure because the water is boiling much more quickly and it's boiling at a lower temperature. This is because when the air pressure is reduced, there's less stuff there. There's fewer atoms and molecules flying around in the same volume of air. So, for example, in the volume of air above this water in the Jetboil, there are fewer atoms and molecules than there will be at sea level. And when the water is boiling, what's happening is you've got molecules of the water are evaporating, so they're escaping from the surface of the liquid and they're becoming a gas. And what stops that from evaporating normally is the pressure of the air, so the pressure from all the other molecules and atoms that are in the air. So when there are fewer of those atoms and molecules in the air pushing down on the water is able to escape more readily, and so it boils more quickly. That's what's happening as we go up at altitude. But then there's an important effect of this reduced atmospheric pressure on our bodies. Because at the reduced atmospheric pressure, there's actually less oxygen available to us. Or rather, there's the same amount of oxygen, percentage-wise, in the air, but there are fewer molecules around, so there's less of it getting into our lungs. And this is really important because oxygen is used in all of our cells in order to make us work and create energy for us. So this device here is called a pulse oximeter, and it measures the oxygen saturation of my blood. So it measures how much oxygen is in my blood. So I took a reading when I was at home at sea level, and I'm going to take another reading now. So I just put my finger in, turn it on, Wait a few seconds. My oxygen saturation here is reading 92, so 92%. At sea level, it's more like 98%. So I'm getting to quite a low level. That's why it's just stopped beeping, but it was beeping at me because I'm getting at quite a low level. My heart rate is also much higher than normal, 81 beats per minute. That's really high. Normally my heart rate's around 50 when I'm at sea level. So, although my oxygen's going up now, it now says 95. So, I'm going to measure this as I get higher up the mountain and we'll see how it changes. The first part of the walk was fairly flat, Nepali flat, a little bit up, a little bit down. We were following the river, which was nice, if freezing way to wash in the evening. We were steadily gaining altitude, so in a few days we ascended over 1,000 meters. We reached a small village where we would stay for a couple of days to acclimatize. This evening we're at Kakot. This is our campsite. We're at 3,300 meters here, and I'm just measuring the temperature. So it's about 16 degrees here at the moment. In the sun, it's warmer, but there's quite a cool wind at the moment. So it's getting to the stage where as soon as the sun goes, we're going to be putting on our puffers and trying to keep a bit warmer. And I'm going to measure the temperature at which this water boils. So let's get this going. Turn the Jetboil on. Okay, the Jetboil's on full and it's starting to boil. It's actually very windy here today, so I've got to try and shield it. Okay, 81 degrees. It's really bubbling now. Yeah, it's really bubbling now. So it's boiling at about 89.5 degrees. So not much difference to yesterday, in fact. Yeah, that's definitely boiling. So it's boiling at 90 degrees. Today I'm at 3,300 meters. I'm going to do the Lego duck test. So I'm going to split it up and measure how long it takes. Right. Say go.
Go.
Stop.
12:09.
12:09, that's quicker than yesterday actually, so that's good. This is my sunglasses case, and it's protecting some ultraviolet colour changing beads. If I open it up very carefully, you can see inside there, they're white at the moment because they've been in the dark. As soon as they get exposed to ultraviolet light, they're going to start changing colour. Let me see if I can grab one out. So this is a little bracelet that I made. So you can see they're white. We're in the shade at the moment. But even in the shade, you can see that they're starting to change colour. That's the effect of the ultraviolet radiation. And if we go into the bright sunshine, you'll see them change even faster. Very vibrant, bright colours. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take some of these ultraviolet colour changing beads and I'm going to put them in two different pots, and I'm going to cover the top of one of the pots with my sunglasses to show the effect of sunglasses in blocking this ultraviolet radiation. This ultraviolet radiation can be quite damaging to our eyes and to our skin, so that's also why we use sunscreen, which blocks the harmful ultraviolet rays. In here I have some of the ultraviolet colour changing beads, and I have them in little bags. One has sunscreen and the other doesn't, so I'm going to pull these out. So this one has sunscreen and this one without. Or is it the other way around? Oh no, this is the one with sunscreen. So this one has sunscreen and this one has no sunscreen. Let's move them out into the sun. And we'll watch them change. You can see that they're both changing, but this one is changing a lot faster. You can see these beads are a lot brighter than the ones that are in the bag with the sunscreen. This is a pair of Glacier sunglasses, so they have special ultraviolet protection. They have quite reflective lenses, which means that they reflect away quite a lot of the sunlight, but then they also have special lenses that block the ultraviolet waves. Now, in here I have 2 pots. I'm trying to keep them as protected as possible. So this one is going underneath the lens. This one is out. So put them into the sun. Let's give them a few minutes here. Okay. Trying to protect this one from the ultraviolet from the side as much as possible. So you can see how bright these ultraviolet beads are becoming. A couple of minutes. Okay, so now I'm going to take them back into the shade. Let's take this one off and see. Oh, there you go. You can see that this is a lot. They're getting coloured because of the ultraviolet. But you could see when I took it out immediately, they were a lot less bright than the ones that had been in the sun. So these sunglasses really are blocking out a lot of the ultraviolet. It's early morning and we're about to set off on our trek, and you can see these UV beads are not very bright at all. It's light here, there's sun, but the sun's not up properly above the mountains, and so we're not getting the full ultraviolet radiation hitting us yet, so these are very, very dull at the moment. We climbed higher, passing through the forest and up a steep slope. It was nice to see the snowy peaks getting closer. When we stopped to rest, I did my experiments. Everyone else got to nap. We're now at 4,340 meters, and I'm going to be measuring the temperature at which this water boils. So let's try and hope the gas works here. Okay, that's on. What's this doing? It's really hard to see up here now, it's so bright. Where are we? Okay, it's starting to bubble. We're at 65 degrees. It's steamy. Now we're at 75. Starting to bubble. But going higher. 85. Oh, it's bubbling away now. Oops, steamy. Okay, it's beginning to level off now. It's really boiling properly now. Okay, and the temperature is 86.5 degrees. So this water is now boiling at 86.5 degrees, and we're at 4,340 meters. This is what we woke up to the following day. It was a little inconvenient. Overnight, a cyclone had blown in and dropped lots of unseasonal snow on the Himalayas. We had had a weather warning and were prepared and safe. Others weren't so lucky. But it did put a big question mark over our trip. This is me in the tent. It's snowing outside, it's still quite heavy, it's been snowing since last night. So we're camped up at the top of the ridge. We were supposed to be further down the hill at a slightly lower altitude. We're about 4,500 meters now. Although the camp down there is not much further down. But we're staying up here because there's quite an avalanche risk on the slope. so we just have to wait until the weather improves. I'm outside. It's been snowing a lot. We've been digging out the tents. Yeah, there's a lot of snow lying around. You can see it. With all the snow around, we decided to take a look at the importance of insulation whilst buried in our tents. I'm in the tent. We're stuck in the snow. We're totally snowed in now, and so I thought it's a good time to do the insulation experiment. So I have a Raspberry Pi with a temperature sensor on it and a real-time clock, and when I plug it into the battery, it's going to measure the temperature every 10 seconds for 5 minutes. So I'll be able to get a temperature curve from each of these different items. So I'm first of all going to try a really thin, light pair of socks, then a slightly thicker pair of socks, and then a really thick pair of socks. So we'll see what the difference in insulation is. Now the Raspberry Pi is inside the thin blue sock and it's attached to the battery. This is in the porch of the tent, which is why the colour is a bit red and strange. It's also muddy, as you can see. This is the reality of expedition life. It's quite interesting up here actually, because this is not part of the plan. We were supposed to be camped down there where there are some flatter areas. We arrived here 2 nights ago and the weather forecast was for a lot of snow. We've had about 50 to 60 centimetres yesterday, so we took the decision to camp up on the ridge because this slope, because of its gradient, is quite avalanche prone and we didn't want to be stuck there at the bottom where we could get caught in a slide. So we've come up to the ridge instead and we've been camping up here. Today the weather is better, so we're waiting for the snow to consolidate a little bit and we're hoping that in the next couple of days we'll be able to move on. But we don't really know because we're at the mercy of the villagers and their yaks to take all our equipment further up to base camp. So we're still in a bit of a state of unknown at the moment. And yeah, this is all part of being in the mountains on an expedition. One thing you have to be aware of at this kind of altitude is the intensity of the sun. It's behind a cloud at the moment, but it's just coming out. You can see how much brighter it is. So that's why we're wearing things like these big floppy hats. We've got a lot of sun cream on, preferably factor 50, and we're just trying to keep ourselves as shaded as possible. There's a real risk of burning here because of reflection from the snow as well. So that's something to consider. Up here we're at 4,500 metres. We've got up to this altitude fairly slowly, so we've taken quite a lot of time for our bodies to acclimatise. And that's really necessary because as we get higher and higher, the air pressure reduces. This means that the amount of oxygen that we can take into our lungs at any one time reduces. So we have less oxygen in our blood, and this can give us problems. Acute mountain sickness, or AMS, is something that most of us will experience a little bit, maybe a little bit of headache, maybe a little bit of nausea, but anything worse than that can be really serious. Cerebral edema, which means swelling of the brain, or pulmonary edema, which is fluid on the lungs. These can be fatal. If you go high too fast, these things can kill you. I've been measuring my oxygen saturation whilst I've been on this expedition, and it's quite interesting to see how it rises and falls as you acclimatise. At the moment, mine's at about 84. Now, if you were at sea level, if you had an oxygen percentage, oxygen saturation, less than about 90%, you'd be in intensive care. So the mountains are a really interesting place because the human body is able to adapt and survive at these altitudes. And that's why a lot of research goes into medicine in the mountains. They can understand critical illness by investigating mountaineers. Two Sherpas descending to Kakot to talk to the yak herders and implore them to come up and help us get to base camp. Otherwise we're stuck. Today we've been out breaking trail on the way to base camp. We're not going to be able to leave for a couple of days yet because we're waiting for the yak drivers to come up, but we're preparing the trail so it's easier for us later.
Well, we're not going today. Well, the yak men will not come today.
Yeah, and if they come tomorrow, they're not going to go to base camp tomorrow anyway.
No, it'll be the
So
next
we're
day.
definitely 2 nights here.
Definitely another 2 nights. So, and because this other group is going to come, if they do come up tomorrow, the other group's going to come up tomorrow. So it'd be best if we
Get the best spot.
get the best spots.
It's very busy around here this morning. We're moving camp from the ridge back down to the original position of the camp where there are some flattened areas so we don't have to sleep on a slope anymore. The avalanche risk is next to nothing now. There's been several days of the snow consolidating, but we're still stuck here because the yak men won't come up at the moment. There's perhaps talk about them coming up tomorrow. Even the military police are in Kakot trying to resolve the situation. Apparently there's another team at base camp that needs to come down, so they really need to get the yaks up there. So we're really all relying on the yak drivers at the moment. But it's looking less and less likely that we'll actually be able to climb Hardwear because the days are passing and we may not have enough time. We decided to move camp anyway, just to get a little bit higher. We carried our own things up there, and the Sherpas and the kitchen tent came up later. We spent 1 night cooking for ourselves, melting snow for water. This is what we should have done, had we got higher than base camp. Quick update. I'm at 5,200 metres here. We've just walked up this ridge from a camp which is just below down here, and we're not going to the summit of Hardwear. That's been decided for a couple of days now. We've just not been able to get up to base camp, partly because of the snow that we had last week now, and the fact that the yaks can't get up to help take things up to base camp. So we're not able to get to base camp. So climbing Hardwear is out. We may have a go at this mountain above me here. So that's something that we might try doing over the next few days. But otherwise, the main objective is out. Before climbing a mountain, the Nepalis, who are Buddhist, will hold something called a puja. This is a ceremony asking for blessings from the gods and safety on the mountain. They piled up our mountaineering equipment, crampons, harnesses, and ice axes, and they strung up coloured prayer flags. All through, one was chanting prayers. We finished by throwing flour into the air and drinking shots of rachi, a Nepali rice wine. So 5,200 metres, got my Jetboil and my temperature sensor. Let's just turn this on. So the Jetboil's going. Temperature's rising already. 50 degrees. $60 degrees. Starting to bubble now, we're at 71. Really bubbling now. 83. Yep, this is 83.5 degrees. So we're at 5,200 meters and the water is boiling at 83.5 degrees. In the end, we never summited any mountains. Nepali politics. We walked out instead, heading home the way we had come. Breakfast is being prepared in that tent. We're all waiting expectantly. We're hungry. Back down in Kokot. Yesterday we were scrambling over that snowy ridge. It was a hard day. This is Kokot village. We're at 3,300 metres here, and we're actually on our way out now. So we'll be walking back down this valley in a couple of days' time and leaving. And I just wanted to wrap up the expedition here because it actually hasn't been very successful. We weren't able to summit. In fact, we didn't even get anywhere near summiting. We didn't even make it to base camp. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first thing is we're in a very remote area here, so there aren't a lot of expeditions that come through, which means that it's not set up like clockwork, like some of the big expeditions. And we were relying on locals here to take yaks and carry some of our kit up to base camp. We have lots of big duffel bags full of climbing equipment, food, tents, all these things that we need, and we can't carry that all ourselves. So we had donkeys help us to get to here, and from here we need to take yaks further up the mountain and up to base camp. Unfortunately, when we went higher up the mountain a couple of weeks ago, a big snowstorm hit, and we were snowed in on the top of the ridge for a couple of days. And then this really messed things up because then the snow was too deep for the yaks to come up. They couldn't get to base camp. We couldn't get our stuff up to base camp. So there was a lot of chopping and changing plans, and people not really knowing what was going on. So in the end, we walked a bit further. We carried some loads ourselves. So we stuffed our backpacks with as much warm clothing and food and things that we could, and we walked a little bit further up the mountain. But we still didn't get very high. So the highest I've been on this trip is 5,200 meters, and that wasn't the camp. I think the highest camp was about 4,800 meters, and we did a walk up to 5,200. So this trip we haven't really got very high, so it's been hard to test some of the high altitude things. But we've still been able to look at things like temperature, ultraviolet, insulation. There's various things that we have been able to do, and it hasn't been a waste. Although the expedition itself wasn't successful in that we didn't reach the summit, it's still been a very interesting expedition, and there's been a lot of things going on, and I got to spend 2 days snowed in a tent on the top of a ridge. That was quite an interesting experience. So there's a lot to be taken from this expedition, despite the fact that we didn't summit. So yeah, I didn't get to do my Lego ducks, my impairment experiments, we didn't go high enough. But as I said, we've managed to do some boiling of water to show that the atmospheric pressure is reduced at altitude. We've had a look at ultraviolet beads to show that the ultraviolet intensity is much greater at altitude, so there's a much greater need to protect your skin and your eyes. We've also had a look at insulation because it gets a lot colder when you go up higher. And so it's very important to be wearing the right clothing if you're on a mountain. You need things that block out the wind, you need insulation, fibres like down or Primaloft that are able to keep you warm and insulated. You need socks and gloves of different thicknesses. There's a lot of technical kit that you need if you're coming out into the mountains, as you've just seen from looking at the yaks. But this is why it's really important to prepare if you're coming out into the mountains, because as you go up higher, there are a lot of issues that can affect you and things that can be fatal, and so it's important to understand what's happening and know how you can deal with it. Be safe, but get out there and explore.